All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're breaking down one of the biggest shifts in automotive history, the move from software-defined vehicles to truly AI-native architecture. This isn't just another incremental update. It's a fundamental reinvention of how we design, build, and validate cars. And right at the center of it all is the new safety standard that's going to be our guide, ISO/PAS 80800.
So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll define what this new AI native paradigm really is. Then we'll get into the core tech that's actually making it possible. After that, we'll do a deep dive into the new safety Bible, ISO/PAS 8800. From there, we'll zoom out and look at the global regulatory landscape, because it is messy. And finally, we'll boil it all down into a concrete engineering action plan you can use for the next couple of years.
Let's start with the big number. Why does this matter right now? Well, because by 2026, the automotive AI market is projected to be worth over $210 billion. The money is flowing, the deadlines are real, and the stakes have never been higher. This is the new competitive arena, plain and simple.
Okay, so let's get into our first section, this paradigm shift. For years, we've all been talking about the software-defined vehicle, the SDV. Well, that era is already evolving. We are now officially entering the age of the AI native vehicle. And what that means is that AI isn't just another feature bolted on. It's the very foundation of the car's architecture. This slide really gets to the core of it. On the left, that's the world we've lived in, deterministic systems. Everything follows predictable if-then-else rules that we humans write line by line. But on the right, that's the new world, probabilistic inference. The system learns from massive amounts of data and makes decisions based on statistical models. This change unlocks incredible new abilities, for sure, but it also throws a huge wrench into how we've always approached safety engineering. And that brings us to the central conflict that every single engineering team is dealing with right now. We're being squeezed from two sides. On one hand, you've got this incredible pressure for speed. Development cycles are being crushed from 2 years down to just 1. But on the other hand, new regulations like ISO/PAS 8800 are demanding an unprecedented level of safety. So what's the takeaway? The focus of our jobs has to change. It's less about implementing features and more about mastering the governance of compute and data. All right, so we get the paradigm shift. Now, let's look at the actual technology that's making it all happen. We're going to start with a revolution in the software stack itself, the end-to-end model. So, the key piece of tech here is what we call end-to-end, or E2E, architecture. Think about it this way. Instead of having a long chain of separate modules, perception, planning, control, each with its own human-written rules, E2E is just one huge neural network. It takes in all the raw sensor data and directly outputs steering and acceleration commands. The strategic value here is huge. It gets rid of all the information bottlenecks we created with our own rules, and it lets the car develop a much more fluid, almost intuitive understanding of the road. Now, if the E2E model is the car's new nervous system, then world models are its imagination. A world model is basically an internal simulator that the AI runs inside its own head. It learns what we call temporal spatial causality, which is just a fancy way of saying it learns cause and effect. It can literally ask itself, what happens if I nudge forward here? How will that other car or that pedestrian react? This ability is a game changer because it allows the AI to generate millions of super realistic long-tail scenarios for training, all without driving a single physical mile. And this kind of acceleration isn't just for the driving function itself. AI is completely flipping vehicle design on its head. Take physics-informed AI, or what we call ACAE. We can now train surrogate models on physics data to predict the results of incredibly complex things like crash tests or airflow simulations, and it can do it in under a second instead of days. This is absolutely massive. It means we're moving from just using simulation to verify a design to using AI to actually generate the design in the first place. Okay, so we've got all this incredibly powerful probabilistic technology, which of course raises the one question that trumps all others. How in the world do we make sure it's safe? The answer, or at least the beginning of it, lies in a brand new standard, ISO/PAS 8800. This is basically the new safety Bible for the AI era. And this is the exact question that our old standards just couldn't answer. Things like ISO 2626 were built for a deterministic world of predictable code. They were completely silent on this issue.
How do you put a safety stamp on a system whose behavior is learned from data, not explicitly programmed by a human, and could theoretically change every time you update it?
To even start to answer that, ISO/PAS 8800 had to define a totally new type of hazard. It's called functional insufficiency. This is the new ghost in the machine. It's when the car does something dangerous, but there's no software bug, no hardware failed. The system worked exactly as it was trained to, but its training was insufficient. Maybe it never saw a cyclist wearing a strange hat, or a traffic cone in an odd place, and it just failed to generalize. This is the new failure mode we have to engineer against.
So how do we fight this new ghost? The solution proposed by the standard is the data V model. The core idea here is to elevate data to the level of a safety artifact. What that really means is we have to start treating our datasets with the exact same level of discipline, version control, and rigorous testing as we treat our safety-critical source code.
The data V model breaks the data lifecycle into 5 critical stages. First, you have your training data, which has to be incredibly diverse to cover your operational design domain. Then comes validation data, which is how you tune your model without letting it cheat by memorizing the answers. Third, you have test data. This is crucial. It has to be totally separate, and it needs to include weird adversarial examples to really stress test the AI. Once deployed, you're looking at production data, constantly checking for any drift. And finally, field monitoring data is all about capturing those bizarre 1 in a million corner cases and feeding them back into the whole process. That's the data flywheel.
Okay, so we've got the tech and we've got the new safety framework. Now let's zoom all the way out to the global stage. Because in the real world, a brilliant technical strategy can get completely derailed by geopolitics and a patchwork of conflicting regulations. This matrix gives you that top-down strategic view. Look at the key differences. In China, the whole game is driven by massive data scale and user experience, which is pushing super aggressive adoption of E2E models, but all under strict data localization laws. Now look at Europe. It's all about regulation. If you can't prove compliance with the EU AI Act and ISO/PAS 8800, you're not getting in. And in North America, the strategy is really being driven by access to bleeding-edge compute and large foundation models. The key takeaway here? A one-size-fits-all global AI stack is dead. You have to design an architecture that is flexible enough to be compliant everywhere. And look, this isn't some far-off 10-year problem. These deadlines are bearing down on us fast. In 2025, parts of the EU AI Act start to kick in. By January of 2026, China's new data security standards are mandatory. And then by August 2026, if you want to sell your AI-enabled vehicle in Europe, you absolutely must be compliant. The clock is most definitely ticking. Okay, so we've covered the tech, the safety, and the global landscape. For this final section, let's bring it all home. What do we actually do about all this? This is your engineering action plan. First, let's be honest about the biggest problems on the ground floor. Number 1, we have a data crisis. You've heard it a million times. Garbage in, garbage out. Without real governance, our models will never be reliable. Number 2 is a trust crisis. These big E2E models can sometimes hallucinate or make really bizarre decisions, and we need a way to put a safety net around that. And number 3 is a talent crisis. There is a huge shortage of engineers who are truly bilingual, who speak both machine learning and classic functional safety. So how do we solve that trust crisis? Well, the leading architectural pattern right now is something called the doer-checker model. This is the main strategy for how we can build a rock-solid deterministic safety boundary around these powerful but sometimes unpredictable AI systems. It's really a strategy of containment. So here's the breakdown. On the left, you have the doer. That's your big, powerful EDE model. It does all the heavy lifting for perception and planning. It's incredibly high performance, but it's also a bit of a black box. So we can only rate it at a low safety level, like ACE-LA. But then, on the right, you have the checker. This is a super simple, totally deterministic, rule-based system. Its only job is to watch the doer and make sure its commands don't violate basic laws of physics or safety rules. Because it's so simple and verifiable, this checker must achieve the highest safety rating, ACE-LG.
So what can you start doing tomorrow? Here are 3 concrete recommendations. First, invest heavily in OpenUSD as the universal format for your digital twins. This will let your teams share simulation assets seamlessly and save a massive amount of rework. Second, start building what we call autonomous software factories. Use agentic AI to automate the tedious parts of the V model, and you could realistically cut your development time by 30 to 50%. And third, you have to establish a formal assurance case. This is non-negotiable for ISO/PAS 8880. It's about moving away from just creating documents and toward building a structured, logical argument for why your system is safe, backed by evidence. And that really brings us to the final and maybe most important point. This whole transformation is also a transformation in our own identity as engineers. Our role is fundamentally changing. We're no longer just function implementers who write code to a spec. We are now becoming the trainers, the validators, and ultimately the guardians of these incredibly powerful AI systems. So I'll just leave you with this final thought. As AI truly starts to take the wheel, we have to remember that safety isn't some obstacle we have to get around to innovate. In this new world, safety is the innovation. It is the only viable path to getting these cars on the road and earning public trust. So the real question you have to ask is your engineering culture ready to lead that charge?